A very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you from wherever you may be joining us from. We're very pleased to warmly welcome you to today's discussion. We'll be looking at the implementation of the follow-up of the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit, which took place in May of this year. And we're taking a particular focus on two topics: agronomy, best agronomic principles, as well as policy solutions. What kind of enabling environment do we need in order to make the implementation successful? And the reason we're focusing on these two topics is because they are very important for CGIAR research. There's a lot of work going on in these two areas across the CG. And we'll hear today in particular about two research initiatives, which have been underway. One is the Excellence in Agronomy, and the other one is National Policies and Strategies. This is the latest seminar in our CGIAR policy series on strengthening food systems resilience, which has been supported by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's my great pleasure to co-organize, for IFPRI to co-organize this seminar today with the Africa Network of Agricultural Policy Research Institute, ANAPRI, which is a regional grouping of African national agricultural policy think tanks, which generates research findings and evidence to support policymaking at the national, regional, and continental level in Africa. We have the executive director of ANAPRI with us, as well as two of the ANAPRI members are also in our event today: the Kenyan Tegemeo Institute of Ag Policy and Development, as well as the Mapata Institute from Malawi. We're very keen to engage our audience in this event. We're actually going to start off with a quick poll here, because we'd like to understand from where you're joining us from. So you're going to see a QR code pop up on your screens. So please take a minute or so to join us here and let us know from where you're dialing in from. We will be having several opportunities also for Q&A session throughout the seminar. So when the time comes, we'll be very excited to hear from you, and you can already start putting in your questions as well in your respective platforms that you're joining us from. You can do that on ifpri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using the hashtag AskIFPRI on X. So we see some of the locations coming on here. We'll give it just a little bit more to see who else is with us today. And I will start by just briefly talking about why we think this is an important conversation. I think everybody knows that despite there having been significant progress in terms of fertilizer use per hectare, as well as investment going into the fertilizer value chain in Africa, there's still a lot of room for improvement when it comes to plant nutrition. The 2006 Fertilizer Summit in Abuja famously set a goal of moving from 8 kilograms per hectare to 50 kilograms by 2015. And today we are somewhere between 18 and 22 kilograms per hectare. So there's a lot of room for growth, considering that the global average fertilizer use is around 135 kilograms per hectare. But equally important and different from 2006 is there's a much more profound understanding of the tremendous soil health issues that also need to be addressed. Of course, plant nutrition is an important component of addressing soil health, but we know that Africa's soils have suffered loss of soil organic matter, soil fertility, and have a negative nutrient balance. There's a lot of water and wind erosion, soil acidification, loss of soil biodiversity, salinity, soil pollution, and overgrazing. And this has led then to the follow-up summit, to that Abuja summit. And this time the summit was not just a fertilizer summit, but a fertilizer and soil health summit. It took a while for that summit to come together. There were a few delays, but it was held, and it was held very successfully in May of 2024. So looking at both of these issues, fertilizers and soil health. Let's take another look at our poll quickly, just so we get a complete picture of our audience. So there we go. Thank you very much. Great participation here. It looks like from across Africa, and certainly US, DC is mentioned there. And also we have Canada and some European countries, Germany, UK. So thank you very much. And again, a very warm welcome to all of you. So going back to the Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit, there were three important documents that came out of the summit: the Nairobi Declaration, the Soil Initiative for Africa, which is a long-term plan to improve soil health in Africa, and then the 10-year action plan, which is essentially the first part of that Soil Initiative for Africa. It's the first 10-year plan to implement that, as well as addressing some additional topics that came up at the summit and that were treated in some technical and policy briefs. In terms of the organization, so the African Union Commission has ownership of this action plan and the Soil Initiative for Africa, and has a plan to set up a African Union Secretariat. The AUC and NEPAD will coordinate the different stakeholder organizations within and outside the continent to ensure effective implementation of the AFSH plan. So it's now my pleasure to turn over to Antony Chapoto. He serves as the executive director of the Secretariat of ANAPRI, and he has worked in various positions, including as a stint actually at IFPRI way back when in Ghana as a research fellow, and has really has had a terrific track record of bringing policy analysis to help inform policy decisions. So thank you so much for partnering with us today, Antony. And I think we want to hear from you, how can we most effectively move from policy declarations, such as we came out of the summit, to effective and successful implementation? Over to you.
Thanks so much, Charlotte. We are really pleased to partner with you to have this seminar today, focusing on agronomy and policy solutions for effective implementation of the Soil Initiative for Africa, as well as the Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan. As from ANAPRI, we are very excited actually, because we know that action is needed at the national level. And as an APRI, we have centers that are in 15 countries and would like to see action start from there. And also, let me take this opportunity to thank BMZ and GIZ for the support, for partnering with the CGIAR on this policy seminar series. The Soil Initiative for Africa and the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan, I think to us is a very bold step towards our goal of achieving sustainable soil health and fertilizer use across Africa, so that we can be able to achieve productive boost to feed the rising population in Africa and the globe as a whole. But let me say that for the implementation to be successful, we need an Africa-led and an Africa-owned process. And the saying that goes, if you want to travel fast, go alone. If you want to travel far, go together. Fortunately, we are not alone in this process. We need to walk this path together with our global partners, who are essential to supporting the various activities. We have the experience in implementing programs in other parts of the globe and are also committed to do that. And this is exemplified from the partnership that we are currently seeing right now. We have partnered with IFPRI to get this policy seminar series going in terms of how we can see change happen in Africa in terms of enhancing soil health in the continent. Let me say that I just returned from the Africa Food Systems Forum in Rwanda, and we engaged with different partners. And I'm excited to say that us at ANAPRI, we are leading the charge in forming a coalition to support the Africa Union Commission in implementing the policy and advocacy pillar of the action plan. We are also joined by other African partners, AGRA, FANAPAN, and global partners, including IFPRI, Michigan State University, and Catholic Relief Services. These institutions have expressed an interest to work together to drive the actions we need in the policy and advocacy space. But this is just the beginning, because not just the 5 of us or 6 of us, there are more players that are required to make sure that we have action at the national level that will lead to continental level impact. Our work in the policy and advocacy pillar will directly feed into the continental coordination unit that is currently being set up by the AUC. And this will ensure that our efforts are aligned with the broader strategies in the continent. And this coordination is essential to create a unified approach that brings together national and regional efforts. So basically, the coalition will look at issues to do with how we can domesticate the action plan at the national level. How do we galvanize resources so that the activities that we plan to do are well-funded? And also, how do we share knowledge? How do we generate evidence? How do we build capacity? And above all, how do we make sure that we are measuring what we'll be doing? So monitoring and evaluation is very important. So to achieve these ambitious goals, collaboration is at the heart of our approach. Ladies and gentlemen, there is no single institution that can drive this change alone. It is the collective strength of our partners that will propel us forward. Our African institutions bring local knowledge and leadership, while our global partners bring resources, expertise, and a shared commitment to Africa's success. This partnership is not just working together. It is about integrating our efforts to make a greater impact. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is hands on the deck. To you, all our partners, thank you so much for your dedication and support. Together, we are on the path of achieving a sustainable agricultural future in Africa, and Africa deserves that sustainable future. Let's get started. So let me take now this opportunity to hand it back to our moderator, Charlotte, to guide us through today's session. Thank you, and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much, Antony. I'm actually going to ask you to come back in just a little bit, and I'll explain why. We were hoping to have Wole Fatumbi with us, who I think many of us on this call know played such a crucial role in actually making the summit such a success. But unfortunately, I think he's not able to join us. So I wanted to ask Wole, and I'd like to ask you to step in his place, Antony, to explain to us, I don't think all the decisions have yet been taken, but in terms of the sort of organizational structure that the African Union wants to put together, we know that there's deliberations about forming a secretariat and including input from various stakeholders, which you've referred to, the importance of all those stakeholders. Could you give us a quick update on that, Antony, where the African Union Commission is with regard to looking at the structure for implementing the outcomes of the summit?
No, thank you very much, Charlotte. I'm not a spokesperson for the African Union, but I have been in this space where we are discussing with colleagues at the African Union and NEPAD, FARA, and other global partners in terms of implementation. We also had an opportunity at the Africa Food System Summit to have a discussion. There was a side event just before the conference to also try to start discussing about implementation of the action plan. But I think what is coming out clearly is that partners need to come together and agree on a workable implementation plan. I think what is coming out clearly also is that there is no one partner that can achieve all what is needed to really transform Africa's agricultural and food systems. So if Wole was here, he was going to present to you a diagram that we are currently discussing, where the Soil Initiative for Africa and the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan has got about 5 pillars, which have to be coordinated from the center by a secretariat that the AUC will support and other partners will support. And currently the discussion is that we should have that secretariat housed by FARA itself as an African institution, but they have to coordinate different pillars. And these pillars include research, innovation and technology, policy and advocacy pillar, soil information pillar, I think there's education and extension pillar, and also I think we have a pillar in terms of monitoring and evaluation. I might not have articulated all the pillars. So this is why you see that as ANAPRI, we are putting together a coalition to try to help the AUC coordinate action around the policy and advocacy pillar. And the other partners, I think at the summit, there was another coalition that was set up where there's IFDC, IITA, IFPRI, and FARA, who put themselves to say they wanted to coordinate the issues to do with the research, innovation, and technology pillar. And from what I'm hearing is that there is need for other African partners to come forward to lead the other pillars. So this is something that is going on. I think beginning of October, was having a discussion with Auda Nepad, colleague Manyeu there, says he's gonna organize a workshop, planning workshop in Nairobi, probably first week of October, so that we can all come together and agree on this coordination mechanism, who's who, how do we get together, because there are donor partners who have also come together to see if they can coordinate in terms of financing the implementation of the Soil Initiative for Africa, as well as the Fertilizer and Soil Health Plan. And this planning meeting in October, beginning of October, will culminate into, I think, some announcements at the forthcoming CADAP PP to be held at the end of October. So we are excited that this is happening, and is happening quickly, and hopefully we can be able to have all partners working together. Thank you.
Fantastic. No, thank you for jumping in on that. So FARA will most likely be leading the Secretariat, and there's lots of work going on to make sure that the many stakeholders, African, international, are well coordinated, right? And that, in fact, is going to be a theme of this seminar, I think, because we do see already a lot of coalitions coming together, and they're pledging to work together, which I think is fantastic given the task at hand. So I think you've really nicely set up the scene for our next speaker, and it's my pleasure now to turn to Oumou Camara, who's the Vice President of Programs at the International Fertilizer Development Center, IFDC. She brings 20 years of experience in agricultural economics to this complicated topic. And Oumou, IFDC has long been active. In fact, you're celebrating 50 years this year as an organization and you've been active on fertilizer and soil health projects across Africa. And Antony touched on this coalition that IFDC is a part of, along with FARA, IITA, and APNI, Could you tell us a little bit about how you have worked, you've helped with regard to the actual summit itself, just touch on that briefly, but then more importantly, how do you see IFDC working as a part of this coalition of implementers for fertilizer and soil health? Thanks, Oumou.
Thanks, Charlotte. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And thank you again, Charlotte, for the opportunity to reflect on today's discussions. And yes, IFDC is celebrating 50 years of developing agriculture from the ground up. In 2005, we teamed up with the AU, the Rockefeller Foundation and Gates Foundation, IFPRI, and others to organize the 2006 Abuja Fertilizer Summit. And a lot was achieved, you rightly said, Charlotte, earlier. But we were short of the 50 kilogram per hectare goals. We were short of achieving that. And so for the past 4 or 5 years, IFDC, under the leadership of the African Union Commission, worked to, and the Gates Foundation, worked to organize the 2004 Nairobi Fertilizer Summit. No, Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit. Now, just like 2006, the Nairobi Summit generated enough buzz, a lot of momentum, but just like 2006, we don't eat potential, we don't eat momentum. We need to deliver on the promises in Nairobi for sustainable food system transformation across Africa. Now, the Nairobi Declaration, next slide please, provides, the declaration, the action points, they provide excellent frameworks, for AU member states, RECs, and the partners to improve soil health. However, the context in the national countries is extremely challenging, and we have competing priorities for national budgets, and therefore the need for unified action. So we must ensure that every cent invested has a maximum impact on improving soil health, and for that, we need unified action with accountability. Next slide, please. So IFDC is supporting the implementation of the action plan in several ways. First, as a member of the coalition of implementers for fertilizer and soil health, we are supporting RECs, AU member states, with the development and implementation of action plans, roadmaps, and compacts. Now, next slide again. So you can see that the coalition has been very active since its establishment in May 2024. Antony said it at the margins of the summit, the coalition was launched. And since then, in June, there was the launching also of the West Africa Regional Hub at the campus of IITA. And Bernard will touch on that later. But in July, early July, also, the coalition acted up upon instructions from the AU as of states and governments in Nairobi to diagnose the Africa Center for Soil, Africa Center for Fertilizer Development, and they will have a plan to resuscitate the center. Now, after that, in July, August, there were a lot of conversations about the establishment of regional hubs in Eastern and Southern Africa. And just last week, there were another high-level roundtable discussion at the margins of the AGRF in Kigali. And an outcome of that meeting was recommendations developed in terms of coordination, resource mobilization, governance, and implementation. So these were generated. And now the coalition is also actively engaging the AU NEPAD to integrate, to ensure the integration of the action plan SCR in the post-Malabo CADA policy instruments. Now, next slide. IFDC at the same time is also working and building and aligning activities, ongoing activities at the country and regional levels to at the country and regional level, sorry. So initiatives such as Sustain Africa Initiative, the DGI Soil Values Program, the USAID West African Grape Program, Space to Place, the World Bank Fertilizer Resilience support programs. So to internalize the Nairobi Action Plan through stakeholder reviews, develop country and regional action plans and investment plans, and establish platforms for operationalization of the action plans. Next slide, please.
And if you could come to a close, Oumou.
Yeah, so I'll keep on this. I may get to it later, but there's been a lot ongoing in terms of at the country level. Next slide, as well as the regional level in terms of the 4 points that I raised earlier. So we've had meetings led by AGRA for the East African community to work on collaborative soil health project, policy harmonization, and next week you will have another meeting for the EAC on fertilizer finance and investments. COMESA also had a lot of convening at the margins of the AGRF, and ECOWAS member states have been focusing on fertilizer sector reviews, as well as the development of action plans. Now, last slide, the next steps. We, from all these engagements, key takeaways is that there is consensus that we need to be coordinated and structured as we begin the process of implementing. The donors are keen to reduce the application of activities and would like to be part of the conversation on the process. There is a recognition of the need for effective partnership, less competition, and more collaboration. And the countries and the regions do need help, technical assistance, as well as resource mobilization. Now, the time is of the essence. We all acknowledge that we must act now. Thanks for the opportunity. Charlotte, over to you.
That's great. I like that. Less competition, more collaboration. I think that we'll hear more about today as well. So I'm now going to turn it over to Bernard Vanlauwe from IITA, who is part of that coalition of implementers that you just mentioned, Oumou, and representing actually the CGIAR as a whole in that coalition. So Bernard, if you could just in your few minutes here talk about what you think are the contributions that the CGIAR can bring to this coalition and to the implementation of the soil action plan, the fertilizer 10-year action plan.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. And maybe before I go into answering this important question, at the CGIAR level, we are much better known for success and impacts with breeding, less for agronomy. And I think that there's a number of reasons for that. One, of course, is that there has been no unifying initiative across the CGIAR for agronomy R&D. In fact, it's over 20 years ago that the last initiative was organized. So with the Excellence in Agronomy initiative, we are actually having a unifying force in the agronomy space at the CGIAR level. And the second reason probably is because it has been more difficult for us to show impact at scale compared with the breeding community. And I think this is also a lesson we need to learn when we move forward with implementing the plan. Now, in terms of CGIAR engagement, I would phrase it around 3 keywords. One is bundling technologies, bundling solutions. A second is engaging in scale. And the third is facilitating enablers. And if you allow me a few seconds of extra content in relation to each of these keywords. In terms of bundling solutions, there's a lot of challenges, a lot of processes affecting low yields in Africa. We've talked about fertilizer use, we've talked about soil health. So I think it's really a reason for being at the CGIAR level to develop solutions that address those often multiple challenges together with our national system and international research partners. And it's not just about yield, you already alluded to it. It's really about agronomic gain. Agronomic gain includes yield. We need to absolutely increase yields, but we need to do it profitably. Worry about resource use efficiencies, including the use efficiency of fertilizer. taking care of soil health and ensuring that we are responsive to climate change-related challenges. So these 4 dimensions require multiple investment, require bundled investments into, agronomy, plant health, and farming system solutions. So that's one point. The second point in relation to engaging in scale, the CGIAR, it's not our mandate to scale, but it is our mandate to be responsive to demands, to associate ourselves with key scaling partners in both directions, for us to provide solutions to those scaling partners, but also for us to hear from scaling partners what has worked where, for who, why, and what has not. So we can refresh or update or seek new solutions for situations where this agronomic gain has not been delivered. The third bullet, enabling, is really critical, and probably that's where IFPRI, as one of the CGIAR partners, plays a critical role. There are a lot of factors or drivers that either promote or facilitate or inhibit the uptake at scale of those bundled solutions. And especially in the area of soil health, which is a slow variable, which takes time before it is rehabilitated, which takes effort to maintain. And the government has a big role in terms of creating incentive mechanisms for smallholder farmers to be sure that they can not only invest in appropriate use of fertilizer and increased yields, but also in maintaining this valuable resource. So I will stop here, Charlotte, unless you have follow-up questions. Thank you.
No, that's fantastic. I think that's a great way to tee up the way that the CG is active on these areas. So we're now going to turn to BMZ. It's my pleasure to introduce Felicitas Röhrig. She serves as Senior Policy Officer within the Division on Agriculture and Rural Development. Felicitas, Germany is actually one of 14 donor countries that also came forward already at the summit with a declaration to work together and to coordinate their support and to implement the outcomes of the summit. Could you speak a little bit about how that joint development partner statement will work in practice? And it would also be great to hear from you how BMZ sees the 2 issues, right? Plant nutrition, soil health, how do you see those as related, and how do we move forward, making sure we keep a focus on both of these interrelated priorities?
Thank you so much, Charlotte. Well, first of all, I would like to emphasize that the Nairobi Declaration and the 10-year action plan marked a really important paradigm shift towards holistic approaches to fertilizer use and soil health. Germany's goal is to promote the sustainable transformation of agriculture and food systems worldwide, and we are convinced that healthy and fertile soils are the basis for this. So what can be done to reach the ambitious goals set in Nairobi? I actually want to underline what Antony Chapoto has said in the opening remarks. For successful implementation, we need an Africa-led and Africa-owned process. And with the Joint Development Partners Declaration, we have committed ourselves to scaling up holistic solutions to fertilizer and soil health and to emphasizing joint action under African leadership. We want to connect the dots and to create synergies between current and planned investments and to improve the sharing of expertise and experience. It was actually quite remarkable that the development of the statement has already shown that the different developing partners have very different expertise and investment priorities. And we believe that this diversity is a real strength of the declaration. We believe that aligning our individual contributions to the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan will create very beneficial synergies between the different investments. Now, in the aftermath of the Nairobi summit, there have been initial efforts to improve sharing and coordination among developing partners, and we really appreciate these initial activities, but really want to reiterate that African institutions remain in the driving seat to lead the coordination of stakeholder contributions. And as FARA has been mandated by the AUC to develop an implementation plan for the action plan, we look very much forward to aligning our existing and our future activities to clearly support the AUC, ANAPRI, the regional economic commissions, and member states in realizing this very ambitious agenda. Now, with regard to the other question, the relationship between soil health and sustainable fertilizer use, I want to underline that the role of soil health cannot be overstated. Soil health is fundamental to the productivity and resilience of farming systems, and it will become increasingly important as the climate crisis unfolds. And the BMZ supports, therefore, an integrated approach to fertilizer and soil health with a very strong focus on sustainability. We advocate integrated soil fertility management, which combines the efficient use of fertilizers, agroecological practices, and technological innovations to promote soil health, increase yields, and promote nutritious food. And here BMZ is building on many years of experience in improving soil health on the ground. One of the best examples for this is probably our global program ProSoil, which was launched in 2014 and has succeeded in protecting or returning more than 800,000 hectares of degraded land to productive use, while simultaneously increasing yields by an average of 33%. This program, which is implemented in different countries in Africa and in India, it is a joint investment of BMZ, the European Union, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and also national partners. And now, together with the EU, we're preparing a new joint global program, which is called Soil Matters, and that is set to start in 2025. It will build on the experience and success of ProSoil and will support agroecology and soil health in several African countries and India, and is specifically designed to contribute directly to various follow-up actions to the Nairobi Summit.
Great. Thank you very much, Felicitas. Healthy and fertile soils is what is required. So thank you so much for highlighting that. And thank you again for your support of this series, but more importantly, your support of the work underway in Africa after the summit. We now have an industry player with us. Really great to have Habiba Mouttaki from OCP with us. She serves as the Chief Commercial Officer at OCP Africa. She's been there for more than 8 years. Previously, she was the VP for Strategy, Sales, and Marketing, and also the Head of Sales and Marketing. Habiba, OCP, for our audience who may not be familiar with OCP, is one of the world's largest producers of phosphatic fertilizers. You're headquartered in Morocco, which is home to roughly 70% of the world's phosphate reserves. So just to put OCP out there, you export fertilizers across the world, and yet you made a real concerted effort, I think back in 2016 when you set up OCP Africa, to focus perhaps more than before on your own neighborhood within Africa. Could you explain to us the role that OCP also had in supporting the summit, but again, more importantly, how do you now see OCP and maybe also OCP in tandem with other industry players working to make sure that we can keep this momentum going and have some real success as a follow-up to the summit?
Perfect. Thank you, Charlotte, for the invitation. And thank you really for hosting this interesting seminar. In fact, I want just to come back on one element that you mentioned, that as we are the largest producer of fertilizers. Yes, we are, but we now intend to be also the world's leading plant nutrition company. And this is effectively our approach was really changed. And now we are more and more in the field. We are more conducting trainings for the farmer and so on, because effectively we want to contribute to this agricultural transition that our continent, Africa, need to happen as soon as possible, to lead the transition and to support the food security for not only for Africa, for also the world. So your question was really effectively how the industry effectively, with our perspective, can support this new paradigm. Because today we are no more talking about the right application only, but we are really talking about the soil health. This is how you will ask the human being why you want to be healthy. I want to be healthy to walk, to laugh, and so on. This is really for me the baseline. So, and to be interested in the soil health is like we are really coming back to the basis to know what is really needed to be done. And as an industry player, understanding the soil needs, understanding deficiencies, understanding this disease of the soil will really help us really to customize and adapt our approach and the solution that can we bring to the farmer and also to the continent. So all start with here, and it was effectively, as you said, from the creation of 2016, and it was the main goal. So we were happy effectively that now the Soil Health Summit changed the approach from really focusing on fertilizers to have this all holistic approach to talk about the soil, the right application, the production. And so, because today the real challenge of the smallholder farm is mainly to have available and affordable inputs that can meet his needs in terms effectively of crop, yield, closing gap, yield, and so on. So this is really the role of industry, to join forces with all the stakeholders. So I'm happy to be representing industry and happy to see all effectively the stakeholders here joined. That's because we cannot do it alone, industry alone, or the public sector alone, or even the financial institution alone. We need implementation, we need monitoring, we need operationalize any strategy. This is why joining hands and having the industry playing that role to really catalyze the investment, to do projects, to invest in local production is a key for any success of any strategy. So the support effectively can be in different manners. Definitely, as I said, to catalyze the action, that to show that working in Africa, for Africa, and by African can really make results, can make things happen. And it's not like only strategy on papers or strategy on the walls, but it's effectively can easily and concretely be action in the field if we join hands. Also, the industry can play a role with changing this paradigm of only pushing fertilizer, but making really the key decision maker is what is the right nutrients that I need to push? What are the right solutions, and how can I support all the farmer through all his agriculture journey to have that happen? Thank you, Charlotte.
Thank you very much, Habiba, for outlining those points. We've had one question that I think is really relevant here for this Q&A that we've built in here, and it's about civil society, and it's really a very good point, right? We've talked about the coordination among donors, we've talked about the coordination of implementing partners, we've talked about the coordination around policy and advocacy. Where does civil society fit into these different coalitions? What are the plans? And I'm just wondering, maybe Antony, Bernard, or Oumou, you want to quickly take a stab at that before we move on with the program? And civil society, this person, S. Spolmore, also thinks farmer organizations fit into civil society. In my view, they could also fit under the private sector pillar, but let's hear from you if you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Charlotte. I think when I spoke about the coalition that we are setting up, we have the Catholic Relief Services that works with communities, works with other organizations. And basically what it is that what we want to do is we want to set up a platform where all stakeholders can come on board and be able to contribute to policy as well as advocacy. So definitely civil society have a role, because they are the ones who take our evidence and push for those policies to really have a difference for our farmers and communities. So there is space for civil society, and definitely as we build these platforms and coalitions, their interest will be taken on board. Thank you.
Bernard, quick thoughts from you?
Yes, it is critical, Charlotte. You know, ultimately, you know, there's different discourses moving around in relation to fertilizer and soil health, and it's only when we cooperate, as was mentioned a few times, but also when we have a similar vision on what needs to happen, that things will really move. Ultimately, we as agronomists, my colleague as economist, we can look at solutions and technologies from our own area of expertise. But the users, the people who will produce those crops and the people who will buy crops that have been produced with respect for soil health and efficient fertilizer use, they have often different dimensions they look at when they look at productivity and consumption. These dimensions are often hindering or facilitating uptake of better practices, and having them engaged through human-centered design approaches or other ways to engage and listen to their own sort of criteria for evaluating practices and so on is as critical as the work we are doing in agronomy and socioeconomy. Yeah, back to you, Charlotte.
Great, thanks. And just two quick thoughts from my side on that question, which I think is really important. One of our next speakers in the next session will talk about working with women's groups to look at the issues around gender and soil health. And then I think, you know, we'll get later also into the domestication, as we're calling it, of the action plan. So certainly at the country level, and this is where the ANAPRI members, I think, will play a key role in also engaging with civil society. So let's move on now to the next part of the program. We're going to look now at supporting agronomic solutions at scale and at the enabling policy frameworks for fertilizer management and soil health. So it's my pleasure first to turn to Job Kihara, who's an agronomist with the Alliance of Bioversity International and CIAT, and serves as a co-lead on the initiative that Bernard is leading and referred to earlier, Excellence in Agronomy. Job, Excellence in Agronomy put a real spotlight on CGIAR's long-standing, but perhaps not as visible, focus on agronomy compared to the work we've done on breeding. With the goals of the declaration, the Nairobi Declaration, and the 10-year action plan in mind, what do you see, or what does the initiative tell us about the most promising technologies for advancing agronomy at scale solutions to boost soil health and increase productivity?
Thank you, Charlotte. I think it's an important question for us to discuss, and especially at this time. I want to first start by saying that precision nutrient or precision plant nutrition has often lagged behind in Africa, and we remain with technologies that are not suited to the specific geographies. There are blanket recommendations, for example, for fertilizer, low adoption because it's not profitable to the farmers, and often there is the need for us to fill that gap. And what we have been doing within the CGIAR, and especially within the Excellence in Agronomy, is to bring together a team that Bernard Vanlauwe has mentioned, the Excellence in Agronomy, assembling agronomy expertise that is bringing together different expertise that are able to answer to the key agronomic questions that farmers would be asking. Farmers would be asking, what should I apply? When should I apply it? What amount should I apply? You know, what should it be for different crops and stuff like this? And by bringing such a diverse group of people who include remote sensing experts, agronomists, who include socioeconomists, geospatial, also crop modelers into the mix, we are able to start understanding and bringing together different solutions. So the assembly of an agronomy expertise is one of the key areas, and I think also the type of coalitions that we are talking about in today's discussion is key to unlock the potential that agronomy has to bring solutions. The second area that I want to talk about is that we have built capabilities to utilize big data and big data analytics. And I think, again, this is a key area to harness the potentials we have today and make solutions that, as you said, are solutions that are at scale, that can speak to different farmers under different contexts. So big data is a key ingredient to the development of agronomy at scale solution. And EIA has actually pulled together an agronomy database that is global and that can help to input or inform some of the recommendations that we'll be making at scale. Beyond the big data and big data analytics is the integration of crop modeling for spatially explicit agronomy recommendations that include the management of nutrient recommendations. The Excellency in Agronomy, in this case, and CGIAR, has developed a modeling framework, which is helping in terms of estimating what the soil itself is able to provide, what the plant is requiring, and determining what would be the gap that needs to be filled by application of nutrients from other sources, be they organic inputs or inorganic inputs from the industry. So through these approaches, for example, I would want to give 3 examples. The Excellency in Agronomy has seen the potential for a 30% reduction in fertilizer application for potato in Rwanda. It has also seen a 25% or more increase in yields and profits in wheat in Ethiopia, and has also observed substantial increases in yields of cassava in Tanzania and in Nigeria. The other area that is helping a lot in terms of developing this type of agronomy at scale solutions is the digital soil mapping or predictive soil mapping, which is actually helping to fill in some of the data gaps that would be hindering the development of appropriate recommendations, and also helping to improve the quality of geospatial data sets. And we have seen some good development in some of the countries in terms of growing these areas. The last one that I would want to mention is the growing in artificial intelligence, because this has brought in the capacity to analyze large and complex data sets and to tailor recommendations to required contexts. Within the Excellency in Agronomy, we have built in some of these models and trying to explore how they can be used to distill key information, to translate those information into messages that can be understood by farmers and by extension. And we are trying to do this by actually also working in a broader partnership that includes AI experts, because there are those who are also advanced in that area, and blending that with what the Excellency in Agronomy has. So those are some of the issues I wanted to bring in terms of utilizing the current capabilities. But also I wanted to finish by saying that an Economics of Land Degradation report of 2015 mentioned a 50 kilogram NPK loss through soil erosion in Africa. And to appropriately address soil health and nutrient management, we have to bring on integrated solutions that also protect what is applied from being lost through erosive processes. I have called it, during the Africa Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit, the zero erosion and run on, or the zero campaign in short. I'll stop there and take it back to you, Charlotte.
Great job. I think you've just managed to really convey what Excellence in Agronomy is working on, and it's very exciting. These are really, using the latest technologies to do agronomy at scale. So very exciting. Thank you for that job. We're now going to turn to a couple of our African national think tanks, and the first one will be John Olwande. He's a research fellow with the Tegemeo Institute of Agricultural Policy and Development, and he actually has also been engaged in the CGIAR research initiatives on policies and strategies. Before I ask the question to you, let me just make an update to the program, because after John, we're actually going to ask Richard Mkandawire to come in because he needs to depart soon. And Richard, of course, is from Mapata, from Malawi. So these are our 2 ANAPRI members that I'd like to turn to next. So first, John, given your engagement with the National Policies and Strategies Initiative, which aims to identify ways of building stronger policies and strategies to help countries address their development needs, you're active in Africa, in particular in Ethiopia, Kenya, Nigeria, and Rwanda, and has also considered quite significantly this space, right, of soil health and fertilizers. Could you comment on what you think from a Kenyan perspective is important when you think about an enabling policy environment to promote sustainable plant nutrition and soil health in Kenya?
Thanks, Charlotte. I would like to situate the response to that question on 3 or 4 action points in the Nairobi Declaration. These are tripling domestic production and distribution of fertilizers, both organic and inorganic, to reach at least 70% of smallholder farmers across the continent, reversing land degradation and restoring soil health, and then formulating policies and implementing them to create a conducive environment for fertilizer and soil health interventions. So when you look at this and looking at the policy aside, some of the key considerations that should go into thinking about an enabling policy environment would include policies that promote sustainable plant nutrition in a holistic approach. That is, both that address low levels of inorganic fertilizer use on the continent, as well as the problem of degraded soils. And this points one to greater support that is needed for research and extension service delivery. These two are very critical for generating and delivering appropriate agronomic practices, which includes a proper utilization of fertilizers for plant nutrition. It also involves looking at ways on how to have proper integration of organic and inorganic fertilizer use on farms in a proper way. Secondly, the policy should also consider that soil conditions and nutrient requirements differ widely, even within a country, and therefore support for fertilizer blends that are context-specific in terms of site and in terms of crop are quite very important. And therefore, efforts that expand, the policies that allow for expansion of fertilizer choices that are available to a broad base of smallholder farmers and farmers in general, according to the needs of their soils, are some of the considerations that need to be considered. Number 3 is what we are all aware about, the global economic shocks that in the past several months have impacted fertilizer supply and prices on the continent. And this has really posed a major challenge to consistent fertilizer use by African farmers. That means that these farmers are vulnerable to those economic shocks. And therefore, policy actions that reduce that vulnerability to fertilizer supply and price shocks would be desirable. And thinking about that, building emergency response mechanisms that can be able to anticipate and manage disruptions in the fertilizer supply chain are very critical for ensuring that farmers are able to access the fertilizers and other technologies that go a long way in promoting plant nutrition. But with that also is developing the fertilizer and other inputs markets so that they are not so vulnerable to those economic shocks that perhaps the countries definitely do not have control over, but on how to manage those shocks and how to respond to them, I think are some of the critical policy issues that countries need to look at. Developing a fertilizer market goes hand in hand with promoting private sector investment in the fertilizer supply chain. Inclusivity of various stakeholders in that supply chain, in policies that govern supply chain, is very, very important. We have seen that many fertilizers and other input programs on the continent have been implemented in a way that sometimes erode the gains that have been made in developing the markets through private sector investments. And therefore, the policies that need to be in place should be cognizant that already in some countries, for example, in Kenya, the market is quite well developed. And if a support program through a subsidy is brought to help, rather as a response mechanism to the shocks, it is important that these other players that have been playing in the market and playing a very important role are not left behind, because they are very important in developing the market for sustainability. Lastly, and I think this has been talked about quite at length, is collaboration and partnerships across institutions. But I want also to add collaborations and
just wrapping up, maybe, John, would be great. Thank you.
Yes, across disciplines, across sectors, and also across countries. And across countries is very, very important, because one of the items in the Nairobi Declaration is the harmonization of national and regional policies and regulatory frameworks to ensure that they are coherent and that they promote regional and continental trade. So that collaboration and partnership is critical, as well as collaboration across disciplines, so that science and policy interface is working together, so that agronomy and soil science are providing critical data for policy formulation and implementation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John, for really highlighting really nicely all the different ways that we need to be thinking about an enabling environment, and again, this interconnection between technological innovations and an enabling environment. So thank you so much for that. We're now going to Malawi. It's great to have Richard Mkandawire with us. He serves as the Africa Director of the Alliance for African Partnership at Michigan State University. He's also a National Planning Commissioner in Malawi. Had a stint with AFAP, so he knows fertilizers very well. And of course, Richard is most known for designing really NEPAD's comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program, CADP. Richard, Malawi has been sort of a star pupil. You already at the summit itself were able to, the president of Malawi, in fact, discussed how Malawi plans to domesticate the 10-year action plan. Could you tell us a little bit, in a big picture way about that plan? How is it being taken forward, and whether you think that Malawi sort of taking such an early start, can it serve as a role model perhaps for other countries?
Well, thank you very much, Charlotte, and thank you very much for the invitation. But maybe first, let me actually just echo the sentiments from Felicitas that I think if we're serious as partners, I think we need to ensure that we're framing the summit outcomes within the context of African-led processes, within the context of CADP itself. And we need continuously to begin to speak into this question of alignment and this question of localization. And this is precisely the reason why we ensured that the president comes to Nairobi, invited him there, and we sought his commitment But even before we left for Nairobi, we made sure that we mobilized strategic stakeholders to be part of this process by preparing a local position paper as well as an action plan in advance of the continental plan. So by the time we went to Nairobi, we were already ready. We had a good sense of what needs to be done in Malawi. We made sure that, the political leadership and a coalition of willing partners were part of that process, those who went to Nairobi, because this question of, ownership by a range of actors on the ground is absolutely fundamental. But more importantly, because this is what we're hearing from, these are the sentiments we're hearing from the partners, that, it doesn't matter. I mean, the partners who are gathered here who are part of this conversation, they may have 200 million, 300 million, but that's a drop in terms of the needs of these countries. We need commitment of African governments. Unless we really begin to induce them, convince them on the gravity of the crisis, nothing will happen. So we need to do that. And this is precisely what we are up to in Malawi. We actually have requested that Mwapata, the local think tank, provides that effort of coordinating stakeholders at the country level. And the donors are excited that we're making that effort to ensure that that leadership by a local institution coordinating donors is actually in place. And the beauty is that the government has endorsed that process. So we'll be setting up a unit within this think tank, which has the blessings of the government, but at the same time, we make sure that the government has actually, has a lead voice. So we're having a small steering committee there, but also an advisor team, which is actually larger, including IFPRI, including some of the CG centers, which operate from Malawi, the private sector. They're all going to be part of this advisor team so that they can begin to tease some of the critical priorities that have been identified in the action plan and also begin to look at the continental plan. That is actually on track. It'll be this, team that will begin also to monitor implementation processes at the country level. But also the larger coalition will begin to tease their own comparative advantage areas where they can actually, work on. But turning back to, are we really going to make a difference? Yes, we think so. I think if we're smart, we can. We can by ensuring that, some of the resources which are local, which are Malawian, by the government commitments, like, the budget allocation fertilizer, which is a huge amounts, those resources are repurposed into soil health. And we sense that the government is listening and talking to World Bank and talking to USAID and talking to other partners on the ground. They are excited. They feel that, yes, they can actually complement or supplement those resources in implementation of the soil health action plan by actually probably putting additional resources. At the same time, I mean, as Mwapata, we're trying to explore how we might actually influence and be part of the CIAR hub for Southern Africa. So we are in the process of engaging SADC. We've already engaged them. We're already beginning to look at, with the support again, the World Bank, they've agreed how we can actually influence other country processes along the same lines. So from our end, I think the bottom line is let's make sure we have these coalitions, strong coalitions at the country level, which brings on board, a range of stakeholders that have actually strategic roles to play in different areas, but more importantly, engage governments. I don't know why we're afraid of engaging governments. As local institutions, that's part of our job to engage those governments. Where we need to challenge them, we challenge them. We challenge them politely, not aggressively, but politely, by evidence, showing the evidence, where there's an opportunity to demonstrate that they can make political mileage, but at the same time, it will make economic sense. Let's actually, understand that the political economy of the decisions they make, and see if we can actually direct, their thinking. The support towards both economic gains as well as political gains on the ground.
Thank you, Richard. I mean, I think you've done such a great job of talking about the need. You know, if governments aren't on board, then very little is going to happen. We all know that. So, but we also know that there are a lot of competing priorities, and even though, you know, Felicitas said soil health and fertile soils are really, we can't meet any other development goals without meeting those two goals. Unfortunately, these things take time. So I think we're in a situation where it's hard to really keep governments focused on these topics, given the many challenges, you know, in particular now in Malawi that you're facing. So it's not an easy lift, but I think it's fantastic how you have really managed to engage the government, and I think you're showing the way how this can be done also in other countries. So we're now turning to Claudia Ringler, who's my colleague from IFPRI. She serves as a director of the Natural Resources and Resilience Unit within IFPRI. She co-leads another CGIAR research initiatives called Nexus, which looks at the nexus of energy, water, and food systems. And Claudia's done some really interesting work around gender and is looking at how, in the follow-up to the summit, we can really look to improve soil health and optimize plant nutrition by empowering women farmers. So it's nice to see that the action plan refers to the need to consider gender in the programming of soil health interventions, Claudia, but how concretely can this actually be accomplished?
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte, for not forgetting the other half, so to say, in the soil health management futures of Africa. I agree with you. The plan says exactly we need to consider gender, and it doesn't actually go a lot further. So there is definitely very much that needs to be done, and we need really all hands on deck. And I think all partners who have spoken today are, actively want to engage in this area. If you look at if you remember Oumou's pictures, she had great slides, and only women were working in the field. So I think it goes without saying that we can't achieve the soil health and fertilizer agenda and the action plan without not only actively engaging women farmers, but we also need to empower women farmers. And people say it's difficult or it's not difficult. We do have a growing, I think, a growing set of evidence pieces that make it very clear that the way we're currently operating, without actively providing resources and knowledge on fertilizer and soil health management strategies, we are, actively contributing, all of us, to the 24% gap in land productivity between women and men farmers on farms of equal size. And of course, there are also substantial differences in labor productivity. And the big worry right now that we see in the action plan and the Nairobi Declaration is that, if we don't turn things around and more actively try to address gendered inequities in access to soil health management, information strategies, fertilizer, you name it, in all of these areas, if you're not changing things, if we continue with business as usual and continue with so-called gender blind action plans, interventions, and strategies, or if we say we mainstream gender and social inclusion, we will probably widen the existing or the already existing pretty wide gaps in women's access to resources, knowledge, agency, and achievements. And we really will simply not achieve any of those goals, neither the 50 kg fertilizer use, that's a very old goal, but I think the much more complex and more comprehensive targets and goals that we would like to achieve or need to achieve if we are serious about climate resilience, addressing food insecurity challenges, etc. The task is not that difficult. We know that increasing women's control over agricultural management decisions can enhance soil health and increase land productivity. If women have adequate decision space, for example, in many parts of Africa, they will be more likely to implement intercropping, which improves soil health and reduces erosion. We also know that interventions, we already have successful interventions that improve women's tenure security, knowledge of their land rights, etc. They're linked with their own long-term investment in soil and water conservation. We also know that if extension services are provided to both women and men, we can really actually increase agricultural productivity more so than if the information is only provided to men. So at the same time, if that is not enough, we know we have evidence, we have insights. We also have mounting and emerging information that women continue to take on larger shares of the agricultural workload during heat stress periods. And these, again, are growing in number and intensity. Whereas the spouses, so the men, they are more mobile, they have less constraints, they have more opportunities, more education, and so they are simply switching to off-farm jobs. So we will see more women. So the pictures already show only women, but we will see yet more women in being responsible for agriculture and food production. So we really have to engage them more actively. But what it also means, men leaving agriculture when the going gets tough, which is a good thing for overall household income. But what it also means, we do need to address these structural inequities. So also in terms of women's access to education, finance, again, land, tenure, security, and mobility. So, and these singular actions like, we've reserved some credit that women can access, or we're employing women to sell fertilizers, they need to be evaluated to make sure that this is what women want, that this is something that women can actually access, and they're probably not sufficient to achieve the transformative change that we're looking for. And of course, it goes without saying that designing soil health measures without consulting women farmers reduces the likelihood of success. So what can we do? As Charlotte said at the beginning, the Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan describes a plan for specialized gender and youth integration. It calls actually for the plan. So the plan doesn't exist. I think everyone here on this call, IFPRI, CGIAR, and all of the other partners stand ready to support the development of such a plan as both a science and knowledge partner. For such an integration program to work, we really need gender disaggregated targets and indicators that allow measurement of progress over time. And that really needs to be a first step. It can build on the evidence that has already been generated on how women's knowledge, motivation, and agency in soil health management can be strengthened. And yes, evidence has been generated, but obviously only in a very small number of countries and a small number of agricultural zones, etc. So we do need more evidence, but I think we have enough to start with these indicators. At the national level, we talk a lot about these national level implementation plans. That's where things, rubber hits the road, so to say. We do need women farmer representatives, in the development of those plans, and also in the oversight of the implementation of those plans. And we need some analysis of the impacts of those strategies. An important additional point that was made at the only gender-focused session at the Fertilizer and Soil Health Summit was the importance to integrate women's indigenous knowledge of soil health management in these national soil health and fertilizer management plans. Given their specific constraint and their unique knowledge systems, we strongly believe that they have very important contributions to make. As a final note, Charlotte mentioned that I'm the co-lead of the CGIAR Nexus Gains initiative. So we were able to set aside some funds this year, after the summit, to extend the only long-term sex disaggregated data set on soil health and land use management that exists in Uganda, possibly in all of Africa, to directly support Uganda's National Agricultural Research Organization. We hope that insight from changes, long-term changes in gendered access and use of soil health management strategies can help to directly shape Uganda's National Action Plan on fertilizer and soil health. And with that, I'll hand over back to Charlotte. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for really keeping the gender topic front and center. I mean, you've just explained so well, and you did actually, that only side event that Claudia referred to at the summit that dealt with gender was actually organized by Claudia. So she's a great spokesperson for really emphasizing, the importance of this topic. And in her words, most of the women in Africa are women, most of the farmers. And there's a huge productivity gap between women and men farmers. So it's a no-brainer, really, but you really put it very, very clearly. So thank you so much, Claudia. John earlier referred to the need to build greater resilience in African markets to shocks. So we're now turning to another CGIAR and IFPRI colleague, Hebebrand, who serves as a senior research fellow at IFPRI's Development Strategies and Governance Unit. And Hebebrand, you're actually working with several other CGIAR colleagues on a forthcoming special issue in food policy, which really looks at how can we build greater resilience to fertilizer market shocks. And I think you're looking, perhaps a little bit at the global shocks, but also let's not forget that there are a lot of other additional shocks that happen at country level, or that those international shocks can be exacerbated by some of the national conditions. So tell us a little bit about what your research so far tells us about how we can have, how African countries can build greater resilience to these kinds of shocks.
Thank you, Charlotte. I think I have a couple of slides. Maybe Michael, you can pull them. Okay. So I think this is quite an important question. Maybe if you can go to the next slide, Michael. So I think let's start with establishing some of the empirical patterns we see in domestic markets, particularly domestic fertilizer markets in Africa. And here is a graph that shows the patterns in international fertilizer price, particularly urea, and the pattern in many African countries, particularly this is the price in US dollar, nominal US dollar. And what we clearly see is while there is stabilization in international prices, African markets are not responding strongly to that change. And you can see farmers are still receiving or facing a very relatively high price in fertilizer market price. So that's one of the patterns we are seeing. What that means is a lot of the discussion on fertilizer markets is driven by what's happening internationally. But when it comes to Africa, I think African countries are facing different challenges that's keeping fertilizer markets high and not responding to what's happening in the global market. This is important because much of the discussion had been driven by the assumption that domestic markets in Africa are well integrated with the international market, and they will follow suit. But that's not the case. So this is important to keep in mind. Next slide. And then another empirical pattern we see when it comes to domestic fertilizer markets in Africa is it's not just price. Availability it had been another major challenge when it comes to fertilizer markets in Africa. So if you can see here, this graph from Ethiopia comparing recent access to fertilizer markets, comparing 2023 with pre-crisis data. And obviously price is a major driver, where 59% of farmers say they didn't apply fertilizer because of the prohibitive cost of fertilizer. But you can see another 35% of them say that they didn't apply fertilizer because of shortage or because of availability problems. So that is another challenge that's important to keep in mind. And part of that is because of domestic challenges, including conflict and other types of shocks. Next slide. And then another important discussion or important issue that we always discuss is, well, it's not just fertilizer price that's increasing, food price is also increasing, so they might offset each other. But what's important to keep in mind is how would farmers respond? And what we find empirically in Ethiopia is farmers are more likely to respond strongly to fertilizer price rather than to output price. And here are the graphs showing the relationship between nitrogen application and fertilizer price, and the relationship between nitrogen application and food price. What we clearly see is from the strength of the lines is farmers are more likely to strongly feel increase in fertilizer price and respond to that by reducing nitrogen application. They are also more likely to increase nitrogen application in response to an increase in output price or food price, but it's not as strong as the first one. And this is consistent with our intuition because most farmers or most smallholder farms are producing for consumption, for subsistence. And what that means is immediately what they feel is what happened to fertilizer price rather than the output price. So that's an important pattern. So building on this, what should we do to build or strengthen the resilience of domestic fertilizer markets in Africa? If you can go to the next slide, Michael. So the first one is, of course, we need to diversify, or African countries need to diversify production, trade, and reliance on inorganic fertilizers. And a lot of speakers have covered a bit of that. And that is an avenue which can be supported by some of the progress where we see some African countries are already starting producing fertilizer. And then a second angle that's worth considering is the concept of profitability of fertilizer. A lot of the discussion on profitability of fertilizer depends better on simple economic or yield gains without considering broader soil health implications. And there is a need to integrate that broadly. And of course, fertilizer subsidy programs are important elements and instruments in Africa. I think it's important to continue the debate about whether they are the best use of money or the best use of public return. And I think whether we can improve the targeting of the fertilizers to maximize returns associated with fertilizer subsidy. Because what we see in some other countries, some countries like Malawi is like, while fertilizer subsidy can only generate positive returns to fertilizer for some farmers, but not for some other farmers. So that's where we need to improve targeting of these instruments to maximize gains and returns associated with that. And of course, I think some other speakers have mentioned that we need to consider beyond fertilizer subsidies, and that involves complementing fertilizer policies using other instruments that can encourage more sustainable, resource conserving, and climate resilient agriculture practice. With that, let me stop here. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Kibram. And we're going to make one other change here to the program. Thanks everybody for your flexibility. We're going to turn next to Maria Wanzala, who serves as the Vice President of Policy Services with the African Fertilizer and Agribusiness Partnership, which is also a member of the coalition of implementers that was referred to earlier. Maria has a tremendous amount of expertise in ag policy and market development, has also had a stint at IFDC and also supported NEPAD in previous posts. So Maria, thanks for joining us. Could you talk to us a little bit about AFAP? What do you perceive to be the priorities in the follow-up to the summit, and how can these be accomplished given how much AFAP is actively engaged in strengthening fertilizer value chains in Africa, with a focus on having thriving private sector value chains?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your flexibility. I appreciate it. I think I'll try to be short and sweet. I do have some slides, if you don't mind bringing them up. I'd appreciate that. All right, so I just want to talk about AFAP's priority, what we perceive as the priorities for the implementation of the action plan, and some of the activities that we are implementing in support of those priorities. Next slide, please. So we have 3 priority areas, and they're all linked to the priority intervention areas that are spelled out in the action plan. So the first priority area for us is to improve access to finance. The second is to support the establishment of an enabling policy environments at the national and regional levels. And the third is to increase the availability of soil health management tools via the private sector, specifically via our hub agro-dealer networks. Next slide, please. So in terms of the first priority area, to improve access to finance, as many of us know, fertilizer is a very capital-intensive business. And so access to finance at all levels of the value chain is very important. But traditionally, fertilizer it's a cash business because banks are reluctant to lend to the agricultural sector in general. So if they offer loans, it's at very high interest rates and stringent collateral requirements. So what AFAP has done in response is that we're implementing credit guarantee schemes to address the two main financial bottlenecks in the fertilizer value chain, namely lack of access to credit and lack of working capital, particularly at the hub agri-dealer level. And we are implementing a trade credit guarantee program, which is funded by both the Gates Foundation and by the AFFM, which is housed at the African Development Bank. We're implementing these trade credit guarantee programs in 6 countries in sub-Saharan Africa: Kenya, Ghana, Zambia, Mozambique, Uganda, and Tanzania. And what these will do is provide credit guarantees to the suppliers, so to the importers and blenders, so they in turn can sell fertilizer on credit to the hub agri-dealers. And the idea is that due to the guarantees, the suppliers will be able to make much more fertilizer available to the hub agri-dealers, increase the quantity of fertilizer that is flowing to the farm gate, to the farmers. The second priority area, next slide please, is to support the establishment of more conducive or a more enabling policy environment, both at the national and at the regional level. As we all know, the majority of countries in sub-Saharan Africa do not have fertilizer policies and regulations in place, and where they do have, they tend to be outdated. And then ECOWAS is the only regional economic community which has a harmonized fertilizer regulatory framework. So what we are doing is taking some action at both the national and at the regional level. And at the national level, we're supporting the establishment of agri-dealer associations, which are the prime vehicle by which the private sector can have a voice into the policy and regulatory space. So we're starting out with institutional strengthening of these associations by doing organizational capacity assessments. And on that basis, we help the associations to establish themselves as viable entities in the eyes of the government. They have a board, they have articles of incorporation, they have registered members, etc. And then we also do some capacity building, particularly from our vantage point, the main area we focus on is training on policies and regulations. What is the content of the policies and regulations? And how can the private sector comply? Simple things like how to comply with the storage requirements. Do not store your bags on the floor, store them on pallets, and make sure that there's sufficient ventilation. So just simple things like that many hub agri-dealers and agri-dealers are not aware of in terms of compliance. Then we also are training them on self-regulation for improved quality control. And especially if it's an association with registered members, then they can carry out spot checks on their members to make sure that they are selling quality fertilizers, and also encourage members to buy fertilizer from registered suppliers, again, to maintain quality. We also provide training on upgrading their business practices so that they keep records of their sales and of their inventory, which helps make them more creditworthy in the long run. And then also technical training on fertilizers, so they can also provide advisory services to their clients. We're also looking at capacity building of hub agri-dealers to become aggregators. So they sell fertilizer to the farmers, and they're looking at how they can also be capacitated to buy back the produce which is produced, and then linking them to off-takers. Another thing that we'll be doing, which we haven't done before, we're embarking on it now, is to conduct gendered fertilizer value chain analysis. I thought I would mention that in light of the previous speaker. So looking at what are the gendered power structures within the household, and how does that affect women's participation in fertilizer value chains? And then what are the priorities and concerns, as well as opportunities and challenges for women to increase their participation in fertilizer value chains? So we'll be looking at that as well. And then the second thing we're doing at the national level is organizing and convening public-private dialogues. The idea is that by increasing the private sector voice in the policy space, it will make the policy formulation and implementation process more inclusive. So we work with the associations to identify what are the key issues, be they market-related, policy issues, technical issues that are affecting or may affect their operations, then developing position papers around that. And then we convene PPDs where the private sector can present their position papers. And importantly, we share those papers with the government beforehand, so the government can come to PPD with their response. And then we facilitate a discussion some joint agreements, and then look at how we can move forward. And then we try to monitor and report on the implementation of those agreements going forward. At the regional level, over the past 2 years, we provided technical support to SADC to establish a harmonized fertilizer regulatory framework for the region, and also to develop the Southern Africa Fertilizer Program. And as we speak, the harmonized fertilizer regulatory framework is in the process of being submitted for endorsement through the policy organs of SADC. But the Southern Africa Fertilizer Program has been endorsed as the region's fertilizer program. And so we're looking at aligning the regional fertilizer program for SADC with the African Fertilizer and Soil Health Action Plan. And in this regard, we are now part of the SADC, the task team that's been set up by SADC to drive the establishment of a regional fertilizer hub for the region. And we'll be meeting, I believe the meeting will be in the next 2 weeks to start to develop terms of reference for that hub, and also looking at fundraising strategies. Next slide, please.
We need to just, if you can wrap up, Maria, thank you.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, our last area of priority, I'll go through this one very quickly, is to increase availability of soil health management tools via the private sector. Our hub aggregators already work closely with fertilizer and seed companies to convene, your field days, your fertilizer trials, etc., to expose farmers to new fertilizers, new seeds that they can use. We want to use the same sort of conduit to introduce soil health management technologies to farmers. And there I will stop my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria, for outlining really the critical role of AFAP in meeting some of the very serious financing needs that we have across the continent. And thanks also for informing us about your focus on women in the value chain moving forward. So we're going to just, as we adjust our program, we're going to have one more speaker in this session, and then we will just move straight to the Q&A session after that. And please do continue to submit your questions on IFPRI.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using the hashtag AskIFPRI on X. And last but not least, Madhura Gautam, who is serving as a senior research fellow here at IFPRI, formerly was working with the World Bank and has done a lot of work at the World Bank, at IFPRI, and in fact, World Bank and IFPRI work together quite closely on options to transform agriculture and food systems and the repurposing work. I think a couple of people have already mentioned repurposing in the seminar so far. And we know, of course, that it refers to this idea of reorienting what are often pretty sizable fertilizer subsidies towards supporting perhaps more balanced and soil and site-specific use of fertilizers, and more focus on integrated soil fertility management practices and soil health. And I think the other thing that people are looking for when they think about repurposing, can we do a better job of bringing in, of crowding in the private sector? So thank you for being with us, Madhura. Could you speak to us about how policymakers, including, I think, the donor community, right, which provides budgetary support, might go about repurposing, again, what are, in some cases, quite substantial fertilizer subsidies? Over to you.
Thanks. I have a few slides, and if Michael or Chris can put them up, that'd be great. Great, thank you. Thanks, Charlotte. Next slide, please. We move on to the first one since time is short. I think what I want to talk about is fertilizer subsidies, yes, but public expenditures more broadly. And by that, I mean the support that the governments provide. The support governments provide to agriculture is critical. So there's no question of that. And fertilizers at the current, at this time, are also critical for increasing productivity. And that shows up pretty clearly in what we see. On the left, you see a figure where the fertilizer use, is really at the very low end of the global. These are different regions of the world, and the fertilizer productivity in principle should be very high. So there's no question that fertilizer use needs to go up. But what we see at the same time on the right-hand side, and Charlotte mentioned early at the start of the seminar, that the fertilizer use is actually going up in Africa, and then it started around 2005-06. But at the same time, the blue line shows that the fertilizer productivity, that's the output per unit of fertilizer, partial productivity measure, actually was rising through the 90s, but has since about the same time when the use has gone up, has started to fall, which raises a number of questions as to what might be the issue. Some of these have already been mentioned by Job earlier in his presentation. There are blanket recommendations which may be resulting in low and inefficient fertilizer use, inappropriate fertilizer use, all of which amounts to a significant amount of waste as far as public resources are concerned, because fertilizer is not doing their job as well as they could, but also environmental damage, and also imbalanced fertilizer use, imbalanced nutrients mix can also cause similar outcomes. A lot of these are sort of associated with distorted incentives that producers might face in terms of the use of certain types of fertilizer. Next slide, please. So next we go to the producer support, which is the main topic of my talk today, is about what kinds of support do governments provide. And there are two main types of support that I want to focus on, and these are mostly public support, policy supports. One is through public policies, typically trade policies, but also marketing policies. And the other is through budgetary support, subsidies, but also public expenditures. On the left-hand side, what we see is the picture is quite varied as far as the incentives that these public policies create and the price policies create in terms of their impact on producers. There's a wide range. In some countries, the support is positive. In other countries, it effectively amounts to reducing the prices compared to what the farmers would have received otherwise, and ends up in effect taxing the farmers. And these taxes and subsidies, implicit subsidies, can be quite substantial. In comparison, what you see in the red bars is the actual public support. This is the share of total value of output in terms of the impact of these different policy instruments. The impact of price policies is significant, and that is somewhat offset by public expenditures, but not quite. The scale of support in public expenditures is very low. And when you break down the public expenditures, on the right-hand side, what you see is the share of a lot of these public expenditures going into input subsidies, which is producer support, which is almost entirely in input subsidies, and within that to fertilizer subsidies, is significant in some countries. Not in all, again, the situation is quite varied across countries, but you see a significant amount of resources going into fertilizer subsidies and input support. On the other hand, support for research and innovation is quite low in a number of countries. And what you see is in countries where the support for subsidies is low, the public expenditures allocation to research and innovation is higher. And it kind of declines over time as limited public resources get tied up in certain types of uses. Now, there's no one or the other. The question is, what is the right balance? And this is where the whole concept of repurposing comes in. Next slide, please. But before going into the discussion of what governments may or may not do, it's important to understand what we mean by repurposing. The idea is not, as Charlotte also mentioned early in the webinar, is not to reduce, but to realign or redirect public policies and support. I mean, I'm talking about both creating the right incentives, addressing both of the issues, analyzing and understanding what the impacts are on producers, and create the incentives to promote soil health, sustainable productivity growth. And it's also equally important at the same time, because all policy instruments almost invariably have different trade-offs, is to make sure that we manage the trade-offs very carefully. Things that might be good for sustainability may not necessarily be good for food security or poverty, but they may or may not. I think this is an open question that needs to be looked at, and there's important outcomes that policymakers are looking at: food security, poverty, resilience, environmental damage, and all of these trade-offs need to be managed. Trade-offs associated with different policies need to be managed. How do we go about doing this? The viable options will be country-specific. There is no single solution, and I think a number of times, number of speakers, Antony mentioned it, Richard mentioned it, The solutions have to be country-led because economic policies are country mandates. That's where economic policy, that's where the action is. But some broad considerations from across global experience are some things that we can share and bring to the discussions as we go into context-specific solutions that need to be looked at. These are to streamline support through improved targeting mechanisms. Is no, as I said earlier, it's not an either-or situation. In some cases, subsidies may well be needed to overcome various market failures that economists typically talk about. But the question is, how do you balance that out? Identify innovative mechanisms to deliver effective support. It's not just about delivering subsidy, but how do you make sure that it does the job it's supposed to do? And here, an important element of the innovative mechanisms would be payment for ecosystem services that sort of provides the support to farmers, but also helps in promoting soil health and CSA practices. Some of these have also been discussed earlier in the seminar today. The third general sort of lesson that's coming through is to shift from tight subsidies to more flexible subsidy options. One, this provides more.
Sorry, Madhur, we need to move to Q&A, so maybe you could wrap up with this last point.
Yeah. Okay, with choice of technology and balance with complementary investments, this is enabling environment that a number of other speakers talked about. Infrastructure and markets are extremely important. Research and innovation are extremely important. And then there's also the issue of how do you deliver services much more effectively so farmers can actually make better use of fertilizers. And at the end of it, I just want to make sure that everybody understands it's important that we don't have ready-made solutions. The solutions will have to be tried and tested in country-specific circumstances, and would be important to undertake critical impact evaluations. I have some other points on the knowledge gaps that we have, but I think we'll pass those for now and hand over back to Charlotte to go to the Q&A.
Thank you, Madhur. You've shown how much money goes into fertilizer subsidies, especially in some countries, and the need for really looking at this at the national level. So I think this is one of the very important policy questions that will be taken forward, obviously, in that pillar on policy and advocacy, is looking at this very large public expenditure. Are there things that could be done better to support sustainable plant nutrition and soil health? So thanks to all of our speakers. Before we move to Q&A, we've got one last poll here for our audience, and we're interested to hear from you what you think are the key priorities now as we move towards implementing the 10-year action plan and the soil initiative for Africa. So thanks for putting in your thoughts on that. And while we wait for the questions, the answers to that to come in, I'm going to direct the first set of questions to our agronomic experts. So Bernard, the first question is for you. We have Eric from Rwanda asking, farmers are facing the challenge of organic fertilizers. Could you talk a little bit about how we can expand into the organic farming sector to support small companies dedicated to producing compost organic fertilizers? And then I'm going to move straight to you after that job. David Martin from SNV Uganda asks, what policy solutions are available that can favor and enhance smallholder farmers to use fertilizers on their small land plots? So why don't we start with you, Bernard, and we'll see if we get some responses coming in a little bit later on our poll.
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, I mean, we understand that soil health requires organic inputs. I don't think there's any question about that. But in a lot of discussions, I see organic inputs equated with organic fertilizer, which is something that you put in a bag from outside and you transport to a field and then you apply. And if there is feedstock available to produce such inputs, and in a lot of situations there is, it's absolutely valid to recycle those residues and use them appropriately. But there will always be a limitation. in terms of the needs versus the availability of such resources, in terms of transport costs. We talked about the gender issues, who will carry that heavy, bulky material to the field, and so on and so on. So we often forget that some of the largest opportunities to actually bring organic resources into the soil is via in situ produced crops that either have deep rooting systems that leave a lot of crop residues, that preferably fix nitrogen. So if you produce 4 tons of maize per hectare, you produce 4 tons of maize residues per hectare in situ. And recycling those residues and looking at systems that produce more in situ biomass is probably the most viable way to actually deal with the soil health issue in a very short term and at scale. And as I said, if there's any scope or waste streams available or other sources to produce organic fertilizer, go for it. But it's not going to be every hectare in Africa that will receive a bag of external organic inputs. That would be my response, Charlotte. Over to you.
Excellent. Thanks, Bernard. And thank you, everybody, for putting in your priorities. Repurposing, farmers' education, extension, innovation, partnership, women feature in 2 of these answers here, local ownership, importance of policy. So thank you. Very, I think it resonates very well with some of the priorities that have been set forth by our speakers. Job, could you come in on the question of how to ensure that smallholders can actually access and use fertilizers on their quite small land plots?
You want me to respond to that, Charlotte, or Joy?
Yes, please.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I would say that there is opportunity for smallholder farmers to apply fertilizers in their farms. Of course, there is always the question of how small those fields should be, but with more targeted and tailored recommendations, context specific to the farmer situations, there is good opportunity for that. In terms of the policy, I think this is variable across countries. We just talked about subsidies, for example, in some of the countries that are actually targeted to support farmers, including smallholder farmers, to apply fertilizers in their farms. And we also have seen a lot of government investments in the digital soil mapping area to be able to tailor the recommendations in terms of what nutrients are actually required and in what amount in different places. So I think it's variable across countries, but there is good and real opportunities, especially moving forward with the current capabilities to tailor those recommendations.
Great. Thank you. Thank you to both of you. Antony, if you're still with us, I think a really crucial question has come in from somebody anonymously. How do we actually engage governments to prioritize this agenda in the post-Malabo agenda, which is being developed right now and will be announced early next year? If you could come in on that, and maybe Felicitas, maybe BMZ has some thoughts on that question, or how would you perhaps like to see this agenda being taken up within CAADP? So let's start with you, Antony.
Thank you very much. I think that discussion is already taking place. Because the soil and fertilizer agenda cannot be handled in isolation with all the other strategies that are being developed in Africa to resolve the issues that we face in the food systems. So the CAADP PP that is coming up at the end of October, I think there's already a realization that this has to be incorporated in the Soil Initiative for Africa, as well as the fertilizer and soil health issues, and the action plan has to be incorporated into the post-Malabo agenda. And then the second part is, how do we make sure that our governments really take this on board and implement this? For me, I think the issue has always been, how do we domesticate? So we need our governments to take this commitment to heart. They need to incorporate it into their day-to-day plans. And this is why I think I indicated that I think it is important that governments at the national level own this plan and begin to incorporate it into their national strategies and plans. And that's an area that I think we will have to focus on. See how best we can handhold our governments to implement, keep on, I think, the civil society also doing their part. I think so that's why you need all actors on board here to be able to make sure that it's not just a commitment, but a commitment that can be implemented and put into action for the benefit of the farmers and the country as a whole. Thank you.
Great. Felicitas, would you like to come in on this point?
Yes, of course, although I think there is not really that much that I can add to what Antony just said, which I fully agree on. Our approach is that we work with national governments and all sorts of local partners, where through various programs like the ProSoil program that I mentioned before, or the soil resilience program. The idea is to support governments in implementing the goals of the action plan and of the Nairobi Declaration. And so by keeping them engaged, by keeping local partners engaged and strengthen the voices of different stakeholders, this helps to keep these goals on the agenda and at the same time to help local partners actually implement the goals. So I think exactly what Antony just said before, keeping the dialogue, working with local partners and stakeholders and strengthening communities.
Great. Thanks, Felicitas. Claudia, I think we can direct the last question to you. It comes from Tinashe Chabdungaka. How can we ensure that the plan, the 10-year action plan, effectively addresses land tenure and security?
Yeah, thanks. No, I think that's an important question. I think there's enough research out there that has made it very clear that tenure security directly affects investment on the plot. So, and women farmers who are expressing tenure security are more likely to invest in both shorter term soil health solutions, but also longer term soil health management strategies, including also planting of trees, etc. So yes, the science is there in terms of how can we really move this forward. I think so. There's supposed to be a plan, an action plan, implementation with targets and progress indicators. And I've already mentioned there's supposed to be a specific section focusing on gender disaggregated indicators, and so we do need information on gendered forms of tenure security to see how we can move those forward in parallel with the soil health management and fertilizer action plans. So at the end of the day, there will be national plans, and obviously similar to what we heard in terms of existing fertilizer legislation and policies, there are huge differences across countries in terms of support to tenure security and polycentricity across Africa. So again, at the end of the day, at the national level, these two bodies of policies and legislations have to come together, and the national management committees and structures will have to bring these different areas together. And I think we're again, CGIAR, other partners, I think are there to support with knowledge and science on the importance of linking these two kind of bodies of research and knowledge in terms of what makes a difference and what can really lead to sustainable soil health and fertilizer management. And tenure systems are an important part there. There's many actors working in this area, and I think they have to be brought to bear based on national policies and aspirations on land tenure systems and security. So yeah, we can't do it without. Much of that will happen at the national level. And again, as I mentioned, it's important to have a diverse set of actors involved in those implementation plans and national strategies. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Claudia. This brings us now to the closing of this seminar. And it's been really a rich discussion. I think we all know that the issue to be solved to address soil health and to have more sustainable fertilizer use across the continent are very big challenges. It's a big task, and unfortunately, there are a lot of other priorities, right? Madhur made the point about public expenditures being pulled in a lot of different directions. And I think the set of speakers that we had today, it can actually really, I think everybody's very committed to working together. We heard about different coalitions at different levels. And I think it will be important, I think, to sort of take stock of progress as we go along in the next few years. So I would love to bring this group back together. And of course, the attention has to shift to the national level. There's a lot already going on that we didn't get to go into in this seminar, but there's a lot of work to be done at the national level. And Antony and others have made the point that also has to be led, obviously, by the governments in those countries. And there are stakeholders, I think, that are very willing and eager to support that important work. So with that, let me just thank our speakers very, very much. A big thanks again to BMZ, to ANAPRI for partnering with us on this important discussion. And really, again, focusing here on the importance of agronomy and policy, but of course there are other topics. Gender, there's finance, very nicely highlighted. So we've touched really on a lot of different things that need to come together to make all of this work. Many thanks to our audience as well. A big thank you to IFPRI's event management team. And in closing, let me just mention two upcoming events that we will be holding. October 2nd, there will be a discussion related to this on debt distress in Africa and the right to food. How does debt distress actually impact the right to food? And then we also have an agenda coming up on at the end of October, our annual Foreman Memorial Lecture, which focuses on nutrition. And here we'll be looking at supporting and shaping the global nutrition agenda with evidence, looking back over 3 decades of research and partnerships. And this year's lecture will be delivered by Marie Ruel of IFPRI. So again, many thanks to all of you, and we look forward to keeping this important conversation going, and we wish you a great rest of your day or evening wherever you may be.